All right, let's talk about Barry Bonds here. Now, there is something called the Contemporary Baseball Era Players Committee, who voted for 8 players for I think it's a December. When does this vote happen?
December 14th.
Okay,
I
so
think
it's
it's
coming
coming up.
soon in
Yeah.
the next 4 or 5 weeks. And of the 8 players, Barry Bonds is one of them. Now, this is did this used to be called the Veterans Committee and they just changed the name of it?
I couldn't tell you, man. This should tell you right there that the Hall of Fame is weird. It's just really weird, man.
It is
I don't.
very
I mean,
weird.
it's weird that Bonds is not in the Hall of Fame. It's weird that there's a lot of other players that aren't in the Hall of Fame, and it's weird that we have a Hall of Fame contemporary committee. I don't even know what that means, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. I mean, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in baseball in general. But
Yeah.
so what's going to happen is that this committee is going to vote for a 2023 class. And the idea is these players, for one reason or another, did not get selected. Sometimes it has to do with like the olden days of baseball where they're trying to create the whole history of baseball. And, maybe there's some guys who were left out and who should be in. And then in other instances, you're voting in managers, you're voting in broadcasters, you're voting in umpires and all that stuff. And in this scenario, I believe this is like the post 1980 folks. And there's just a bunch of guys who we've mentioned Will Clark before. Will Clark was on this list, and guys who just didn't make it. And so now that they cultivate a 16-member committee. Will vote on December 4th. So it's actually December 4th, not the 14th. And any candidate receiving 12 out of those 16 votes will earn the election. Now, there's some really fun players on this list.
Yeah.
Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Albert, don't call me Joey Bell, Don Mattingly, Fred McGriff, Dale Murphy, Rafael Palmeiro, and Kurt Schilling. So those 8 were selected out of a much bigger pie of players, and they will get voted on. I was trying to find out who the era committee is because I couldn't figure I'm assuming they're writers. I know there's a baseball writer who's one of the 11, they call them veteran historians. Because my thought was like, okay, well, if this writer's list of 16 is a little on the younger end, then Bonds and Clemens and maybe not Palmeiro, but Bonds and Clemens specifically have a really good shot. But if this is an older class of writers, I still don't think they're going to get in.
I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it takes you to the Hall of Fame website when you click on the Contemporary Baseball Era Players Committee, 1980 to present. But yeah, it's a method of appointment. The Hall of Fame's board of directors shall appoint the committee. There you go. It's very very ominous, but yeah, doesn't say who's on there, but it is a 16-person committee.
Yeah, I couldn't find the list of people on it, so it's hidden somewhere. Probably for good reason. They don't want these guys to be yelled at.
Yeah, no, they're going to be hounded right now because you need 12 of 16 votes per person to get in. So you've got to have 12 of the 16. God, I mean, any other time you're looking at this list and you're going, Roger Clemens should be in. Mattingly probably should be in, and there's no steroid issue there. Fred the Crime Dog McGriff should be in, probably. Dale Murphy, probably. Again, for the era that he played in, he was one of the most talked about players.
Yeah, when we were younger, I think he was like a 3-time MVP or something like that.
Yeah, that was the guy. I mean, he was the masher. He was the home run guy. Rafael Palmeiro. I mean, he's a dick, but I guess he probably should be in too. If you're talking, these other guys should be in. Kurt Schilling's not in, probably because of his politics.
Mhm.
I think that's kind of what has kept him out. So a lot of these guys should be in the Hall of Fame already. Is this a committee that's going to make it right? I really don't know. Um, I would imagine one or two of these guys get in. And I can imagine it going the route of Dale Murphy and Don Mattingly, right? Two guys that aren't associated with steroids, just to say, look, we're working, we're doing something. There's a reason for this committee. I could also very easily see Bonds getting in. He's probably one of the best baseball players we will ever see in our lifetime. I mean, I know we just talked about Shohei, but Shohei is not Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds was different. I mean, there's nobody that we're ever going to see that is Barry Bonds material.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird, man. It's one of those complete toss-ups. It can easily go either way.
So Jason Stark from The Athletic,
Mhm.
he thinks, and he doesn't predict, but he thinks Fred McGriff kind of fits what this committee is looking for. Somebody who's just overlooked for whatever reason.
Yeah.
He says, he writes, he fell off the writer's ballot after 10 tries in 2019. He never received 40% of the vote in any election. But I've often said that McGriff was the most criminally undersupported candidate of all time, and he might just be the early favorite to get elected by this group of Hall of Fame players, executives, and writer historians. Okay, so there are players involved in this list, and executives and writers. Okay, so that may lean a little bit more towards Barry. But then again, if you're a clean player who made the Hall of Fame, do you want to vote in the guy who took steroids? I don't know. That one's tough too.
That's tough. That's why they got to put in Pete Rose, and then that way, right? Just go ahead. And that's another reason, and that's another one too. I know Pete Rose is banned for life. That's a whole other show. I don't want to get into that. We could do a whole show on Pete Rose.
Yeah, totally.
That's just kind of a mess. But looking at Bond's percentages in the the years that he was eligible, he started out at just 36% of the vote. Mm-hmm. So everybody was very angry with him when he first made the Hall of Fame ballot.
Yep.
Then he went down to 34, and we thought, oh crap, he's just going to fall off this thing in the next couple of years. Then he bumped up to 36, 44, 53, 56, 59, 60, 61, and finished at 66%.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they're going to take any of that into consideration, because McGriff's numbers never getting above 40%, but Bonds finishing the last 3 years above 60%. Is that going to play into that committee, or are they just going to completely ignore those numbers altogether? So that's a question that I'm kind of curious about.
Yeah. So he finishes off by saying, why is McGriff the kind of early favorite to get in? He says he just fits the profile players who get the support of groups like this. A 2-time home run champ who played 19 years, popular teammate everywhere he went, would have reached 500 home runs if not for the strike of 94. And it all seems perfect for this committee. You can just feel the love building in the room for a guy like this. So it sounds, he could be one. I kind of like the idea of Mattingly and Murphy getting in, just because, when we're growing up, baseball is bigger than life for us. And they're two of the biggest stars in baseball at that point. 19, you're talking when I first started really, really following, it is 1984. And Mattingly and Dale Murphy are two of the biggest stars in baseball at that point. Yeah. Palmeiro, Albert Bell. Albert Bell's just like a disliked guy.
Yeah, I said Palmeiro's a dick. How about Albert? Don't call me Joey Bell. That guy was Joey Bell. A huge pain in the butt.
Yeah, and then didn't he cork his bat, and he's got tremendous power, and he's still corking his bat?
Oh yeah, he corked his bat. He, almost killed Fernando Vina when he was running towards second base. And then he, I think he threw a ball into the stands and hit somebody in the chest too. There was that time where he refused to step in the box because he didn't like the pitch. the call. And so he just stood outside the box, and the umpire said, or no, that's what it was. He got hit by a pitch, and he stood in the box and said, nope.
I'm not going to
I'm
first
hitting.
base.
Yeah, go to YouTube, find the Albert Bell refuses to go to first base video. It is absolutely fantastic. They're not going to play. They just said, the umpire said, well, we're not going to play until you go to first base. You got hit. I mean, it cleanly, you got it. There was no question. And he just said, no, I want this guy. I want to keep hitting.
Yeah.
So
amazing.
Yeah. Fun.
Okay. And then what Jason Stark says about Bonds and Clemens is, he says, you don't need George Mitchell to tell you it has never been about whether these two guys had numbers. It's about the other stuff, and still is. Maybe this committee will surprise us and be more willing to overlook those performance-enhancing drug clouds than the writers were. But what's more likely is that the ex-players on this committee will want no part of sharing the podium with Bonds and Clemens anytime soon on a July afternoon in Cooperstown. So something that's kind of interesting, and I would love to see how this plays out. And someone like Jason Stark would be probably the guy to talk about it. Peter Gammon's one of those guys who follow this stuff so closely, which is if Bonds had 5 more years, as you were reading off those percentages, he could probably get to 75. He just ran out of time. His percentages were growing and growing and growing. And what that has to do with is more than likely some of the older writers who were holding him accountable for the steroid stuff falling off, some younger writers coming in going like, yeah, I get it, but he's still one of the best players. We can't keep him out. In 3 years, I think they do this again. And if Bonds and Clemens or anybody on this list don't get in this year, I think there's another vote in 3 years from now. I don't know if the mindset of that group changes much in 3 years like the writers were because like exactly what Jason said, what the players, want standing next to them could be the same. So this may not work the same way in which, we're like, if Bonds only had a few more years, he gets in. This may not work that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it may not work that way. If the word is that they're leaning towards McGriff, he's the opposite guy of Barry Bonds. The opposite aura, the opposite, what happened in baseball. And so I think they're kind of almost making a point with that. If they went that route to say, look, here's a guy that should have hit 500 home runs. Here's another guy that hit 700 plus home runs, but shouldn't have hit 700 plus home runs. It's kind of what they would be saying with going with McGriff in that point. But like you said, Bonds was hurt those first 4 years, under 45% the first 4 years of his voting. I don't know, man. It's so crazy. The Hall of Fame, I think when we were kids, up until probably about, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the Hall of Fame was like the stuff, man. That was when you saw a guy get elected to the Hall of Fame, you go, man, that guy really, it was one of baseball's best. And then you saw the highlights and everything else. Now it just kind of feels like the Hall of Fame is here. It's in our heads. That's our Hall of Fame. We know what Bonds did. We saw what Bonds did on the field. I mean, even before the cloud of steroids, he had Hall of Fame numbers. If you just, let's say he blew out his knee and could never play again before he even took a drop of steroids, you took all those numbers, he's probably still in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was that good all around of a player. Just Willie Mays type of player, and you don't see those guys come around all the time. So, but I don't know. Committees, man, committees. They're gonna do what they're gonna do, and they're gonna feel super righteous about it too.